right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG and gaming news podcast. My name is Het,
I'm Eric.
And I am Stan.
and today we are going to be talking about game delays. We've had some recent game delays with CyberPunk 2077 being delayed for another 2 months, and then CrossCode, which was basically delayed for about a year for its console releases, finally got a release date. So we're going to be talking about game delays and that context, and then we have announcements from the prior week that we didn't really get a chance to talk about, mostly because we were talking about the PS5. So we're going to be focusing on Persona 4 on Steam, and then also there was another Paper Mario trailer that we want to talk about. And then we're going to transition into what is our favorite RPG character on the Nintendo. This was inspired by a question from one of our listeners, and he's been a guest on here as well, Lane. And he asked, what is our favorite RPG on every console? We factored how long it would take us to do that, and we realized we do not want to have a 9-hour podcast. So we're gonna attack each console periodically. And then we have a Discord question from Redfield who says, what is your favorite Final Fantasy game that is technically a non-Final Fantasy game? Examples: Lost Odyssey, Last Story, etc. Right? So Sakaguchi games not associated with Square, that type of thing. So those are the topics for this week. And let's just go ahead and jump into our first topic here. So are game delays a good thing? Now, like I said when I was announcing the topics here, what really inspired this topic here is the recent news that CyberPunk 2077 is going to be delayed until November 19th, 2020. This is kind of a weird situation because the original release date was April 2019, then it was delayed to September 2019, and now it's delayed until, did I say 2019? I meant April 2020, then September 2020, and now November 19th, 2020. So a couple of delays throughout this year. And, we're just going to get into that and basically talk about when is a game delay a good thing and when's a bad thing. And then we're also going to tie that into CrossCode's console port. We finally got a release date for that, July 9th, 2020. Initially was supposed to come out in 2019. And it's just had a couple of issues. And basically we're going to be talking about that and whether or not we're excited to pick it up as well. So that's the framing for this topic. And I just want to open it up here and say, just in general about game delays, we talk about any game delay, but are game delays a good thing? If when is it a bad thing? That type of thing. Does somebody want to start us off?
Yeah, I think with game delays, I think it's always fine in most cases.
Right.
I think the biggest and most important thing a developer should do is have an open, clear communication with your fan base, pretty much, which is a very important thing. Like, we can take Metroid Prime 4, for example. Like, Nintendo just could have been completely silent about it and just be like, keep the whole thing with Bandai Namco behind. Just keep it a secret and just say we secretly switched to retro. But no, they made a whole video. They came out and they said, okay, so Metroid Prime 4 is not going to be coming out for a while, and here's why. It's because we were not satisfied with the work that Bandai Namco was developing for this game, so we decided to drop our collaboration with them, start from scratch, and have Retro working on the game again, like they did the previous 3. So it's I really like it when developers do that. And while CyberPunk is getting maybe a little annoying with the delays at this point, I can understand why people might be annoyed at this point, but they are openly saying why they're delaying the game.
Right.
And then sometimes you guys remember Unsung Story, that Kickstarter funded game that Matsuno had?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you remember that whole fiasco? It's too much to explain, but that's like the worst way to deal with delays. That and Mighty Number 9 and stuff like that. It's really a case by case thing with delays. As long as they're developers are strongly communicating it, I'm more open to being okay with it.
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on the major thing with me is that they just need to keep things open and honest and basically tell us what's going on, right? The most recent example I can think of that was a terrible way to do it. It has nothing to do with the quality of the game. It's a very controversial game right now, but The Last of Us 2, right? They announced the delay by saying that it was delayed indefinitely.
Mm-hmm.
People were like, well, what does that mean? Right. Like, and I really felt like using the word indefinitely with like no further, I mean, they said in relation to the current thing that we're dealing with, they said they just didn't feel like it was a good time. And for people looking forward to that game, that didn't give them enough information. And when you don't give people enough information, they start to guess. Right. So, I mean,
Yeah.
people are wondering, is this game going to be a redesign for the PS5? Did it flop like a focus group test because it wasn't very good? Now they have to remake it. Is it just super buggy? You know, like using the word indefinitely was just very hyperbolic without extra context. And then once the game started getting leaked, suddenly they had a release date, which made it even worse because they're
Yeah.
like, I thought you were concerned about the pandemic. Like, you know, so then people are like, well, this game's going to suck. They were going to delay it. And now we forced their hand, and it's actually getting good reviews. So I don't want, you know, depending on who plays it, but if you enjoyed it, I'm not saying the game sucks, but looking back, it made us not feel like very confident about it. Right. Whereas like you pointed, like you pointed out with Cyberpunk 2077, they've just been very straightforward about it the entire time.
Yeah, as much as I like to talk about Last of Us 2, this is an RPG podcast. So
Right. Well,
we'll keep it there. But,
yeah.
yeah, I think Cyberpunk 2077 is doing it the most right way they can.
Yeah. The other thing that I think really concerns me, honestly, is like usually I'm pretty excited about delays. I got to be honest, just because I know that they're going to work on the game. It's going to be a better product. But I get a little nervous when it's just like a small delay, but it's not. Usually, if it's a 1 month delay, I know it's usually something to do with shipping or they just, especially with a worldwide release. But when it's like a 2 to 3 month delay, I get nervous. And I realize Cyberpunk just had a 2 month delay, but that was on the back of like a 5 month delay. So, you know, and there's some rumors going around with what's going on there. But when it's like a 2 to 3 month delay, I just think that's weird because usually if you delay a game, that's going to correlate with to hurting the sales numbers, right? Because, you know, people thought it was coming out then, you know, they had other plans, whatever. It just hurts the sales numbers sometimes. So to risk lower sales numbers for a 2 to 3 month delay, I just don't get it because the problem has to be pretty severe for you to risk that. So,
Yeah.
you know, why would you, is 2 months adequate time? Right? Like what else is going on here? And I think back to Final Fantasy 15, where Tabata said they asked for a 9 month delay, and Square was like, "No, it's got to get out before Christmas. 2 months." You know, and so that's the type of stuff that kind of makes me a little nervous and makes me think that have less confidence in the product when it's a very small delay like that. So that's the other part where I start to get nervous
Well, here's the thing: the this delay seems,
with Cyberpunk.
yeah, Cyberpunk. The delay is being lined up right with Xbox Series X and PS5.
Yeah.
I feel like that can't be a coincidence.
It's going to be a launch day title. Stan,
It
you've been
must be,
quiet over
yeah.
there. What do you think?
No, you hit pretty much all my thoughts. Like, if you're going to delay the game, you got to be forthcoming about the reason and not, like you mentioned, The Last of Us 2 example, give a new date, right? Now, like, don't take this the wrong way. I wish that games companies would not announce their release dates so far in advance, right?
Right.
But that's a reality of like big companies if they have like investors, and then also in general just the fans want a date for the game to look forward to, right? Once they find out that once they find out that a certain game is in development, right? The next question that I'm sure these developers hear knocking on their door all the time is, when's it coming out, right? When's it coming out? When's it coming out, right? They probably
Yeah.
just get that. They just get that daily, probably. So then you put out a release date, not just to get rid of those questions, but also to so that you have a goal, right? You have a clear deadline, right? So that the game can come out and you can make money. But
Yeah.
I wish they weren't announced like so far in advance, because then, like, the expectation is that Cyberpunk, everybody would have played this game already by now, right? Because it was supposed to come out in April, and
Yeah.
then it got pushed back to September and now November. So it's kind of like, it's unfortunate, but part of it is like you bring it on yourself when you announce the game so far in advance, like the date.
Right.
But to handle it, like, they've done as good a job as anybody, I think. The CD Projekt Red, like, they've very clear communication, like why. I believe in this one they said that the content of the game is finished. It's the fine tuning and the bug testing that they weren't able to complete in time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so rather stay committed to that date, they said, okay, no, like, we're switching it to November release.
Well, and
So,
they let people get excited about the game too, because they said, "Hey, there's a lot of bugs right now because this world is so complex, because it's so big, because there's so many stories. There's just a lot of bugs, but they're still having a playable demo for the press, and I think
few
next
days.
week, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's they're showing like, no, we're not lying. The game's done. We're just we there's a lot of branching dialogue and stuff that needs to be fixed. And
Mhm.
and you brought you're touching on a good point here, Stan. That reminds me of the Final Fantasy VII remake and how I think that initial launch is the absolute worst thing you can possibly do, where the game was announced in 2015, right? Then Katase is giving interviews in December 2017 timeframe, saying things like the voice acting's about wrapped up. Okay.
Right.
And then we don't hear anything for 2.5 years, right? But except one thing we do hear is that it was pulled back from CyberConnect 2 and it's being like reworked, right? But other
Yeah.
than that, just complete silence. And then suddenly, like, they announce it, about 9 months before the release date. And while I think they're getting the message, they didn't seem to understand that cat's already out of the bag, right?
Yeah.
If you wanted
Mhm.
to wait till 9 months beforehand to announce it and not say anything, that's fine, right? But to announce the game and then not say anything at all, like that lines of communication, at least we got, the game was being delayed indefinitely with The Last of Us 2. Like, Square was just like, no, it's going great. Like that's all they would say for 3 years, right? So
Yeah.
I think that option was literally the worst way to launch a game, but I think they're starting to figure it out. But
Well,
much better here with CyberConnect 2 or
I,
Cyberpunk 2077.
regarding Square, yeah, like, they're like the extreme example of how to not do it. And I don't know if they've really learned their lesson, because we had that Project Athia reveal,
Oh, that's true. I
at the
forgot about
PlayStation
that.
event, with no date whatsoever, right? Just coming to next gen consoles, and it's
I
like,
mean, if they don't have a title, expecting a release date.
They could
Yeah.
probably tell you when they started working on it, like February.
Yeah, but like, because of Square's reputation, I think a lot of people look at that game and they're like,
PlayStation
no
6.
date, no date attached to it, and they're like, okay, that game's never coming out. Or like, by the time they re-announce this, like, I'll have forgotten about it, so why get excited now?
Right, it'll be a
So I
different
think
game.
I think their reputation has, for announcing games way too early, is like actually a detriment at this point.
Yeah.
But Cyberpunk and CD Projekt Red don't have that kind of reputation. So when they delay something, or announce it ahead of time, people are more trusting of them currently.
Well, when 16 finally does get announced, I really hope they actually have gameplay to show instead of just like some
Conceptual.
cinematic trailer and be like, we'll be coming out maybe.
Someday.
we might rename the character and like change their face, but these people working on it are going to come out with something. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm pretty excited about Cyberpunk. A lot of people have been pointing out that Witcher 3 faced lots of delays for very similar reasons and explanations, right? Because it's an open world game. They want to, fix the bugs and make sure it's as polished as it can be. And that game came out, and that was, by many people's consideration, one of the best games released in the last decade. So,
the difference here clearly is that a perfectionist is just wanting to touch up on more stuff. That definitely seems like the case over there.
Yeah.
Where 15 was more like, oh my god, we need to make this a barely functional game by release. That's like two very different things. I mean, Cyberpunk looks like it's clearly ready to some extent. Like it's at least in its final beta phases right now.
Yeah. Final Fantasy 15, man. Tabata had said that in his initial announcement that it was going to be delayed, right? He did give some stuff. He said the base game's done, that type of thing, right? But he said that I felt personally, and the team that I was working with felt, that we would regret it if the game launched in its current condition. And then he said, so that's why we're delaying it 2 months. And I'm like, if you're gonna regret its launch, that's like not that ready. You would literally like regret it later. 2 months. I don't know. It's a sore spot with me, but it looks like Cyberpunk's not following that same route. What do you guys think about CrossCode? Because
CrossCode. That has been I don't know if you guys follow their Discord channel at all, but they are very communicative to like a T. It's like every time they have some kind of update, they come up and share with everyone. They're very discreet and they're very detailed on why the game is taking longer than it should to port. It's mostly because they are pretty much going through a whole new line of coding for consoles that require, I think the consoles have HTML5.
Yep, HTML5. Yep.
Yeah, and they use a different script for CrossCode on PC. So to get this working, they had to pretty much completely change the code to make it functional on consoles. So that is a very hefty task, especially if given to a small team. It's kind of like making the whole game again without the assets and story creation portion part of it. But they've been pretty amazing in communicating and even being jokingly about it sometimes. And while it's disappointing to see that they didn't have a release date, at least until now, like you could have like mad respect that, and they are clearly show that they're working hard to make sure it gets to those consoles. So I am very impressed by how they deliver it, and I think like bigger companies, especially Square Enix that we talked about, could take a lesson or two from them, in particular on how to communicate with your audience if there are delays or just ways or like breadcrumbs to keep your audience satisfied while you're working on a title.
Yeah, I mean, there was, I will have to say, there was a small portion of time there where they initially announced that the game was coming out in 2019, and then we didn't really know what was going on, and it was almost a criticism. We thought, like, is this game still coming to the console? But then, like you said, Eric, they started just being very transparent about what was going on, that they had to convert the language into another language, so they were literally like they had to recompile it into a new code, and it was making it slow on console, and it shouldn't be slow, and it's a very buttery smooth on PC, so they wanted to keep that. So they just walked us through basically everything, the technical details, and I have a good feeling that a lot of polish was put into this, and that it's going to run really, really well on console. And again, it's not because it's a super hyper realistic game. I love the art aesthetic. It's an indie Super Nintendo styled game, but it just has such a great art aesthetic. But it's just because of that what you brought up, Eric, that it was an HTML5 and they had to reconvert it into another language. So I'm feeling pretty good about this, despite the fact that it was delayed for practically almost a year. But Stan, I know you haven't played it on PC at all. Or what do you think about the delay? Did the delay make you want to not pick it up,
Uh,
or you concerned? You're going to wait? What do you?
no, not concerned at all because I've heard them say the reasons like you just mentioned the different coding language that they had to use to put it over on console. So it's just cool. I know the reason. That takes time, So that didn't cause me any concern as like, oh no, maybe it'll be a buggy mess or something. It's like, no, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of hours, right, to get that right. So,
Right.
and yeah, I haven't played it on Steam because this seems like the perfect Switch game, you know. So
Speaking of which, they have 1,500. I don't know if they're sold out yet, but they have 1,500 hard copies, physical copies for PS4 and Switch, and I think Xbox as well. So I went ahead, and it was a collector's edition. So I went ahead and pre-ordered that, but
nice.
it's not coming out till August, and the game comes out in July. So
So you're gonna have to wait.
well, no. So here's the
Yeah.
thing. I got it collector's edition on PS4. I think that I'm just going to buy it on Switch digitally, and I'm just going to have the collector's edition.
You're gonna buy the game 3 times.
Yeah, I'm going to buy it 3 times.
You're supporting them big time.
Yeah, dude. I mean, this is. I just want more games like this to exist, and the fact that they're putting in so much effort, and they do have that communication factor, I think really makes me feel confident about the product in the same way that with Cyberpunk, with CD Projekt Red, that they have a willingness to tell us what's going on and just be honest about it. It makes me feel better and more confident about the game. So I think these 2 games are good examples of how to do this and actually make people feel better about the game, right? Because we've all had that experience where a game is coming out and you just get that eerie feeling like it's not going to be ready, right? Or maybe you play it and you're like, this needed some more time. But
yeah, I don't know. I doubt the developers of CrossCode ever see this, but if you do, by chance, I'll just say thank you for all that really hard work. The first thing I told myself when I played CrossCode the first time, I was like, man, I really want to play this on handheld. And now it's finally happening. It's that and Paper Mario are pretty much my summer games. So yeah, that's a definite day one for me. I'm kind of keep myself busy till it comes out.
Yeah, totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you guys want to touch on with game delays? I feel that we kind of got a good touch on this. Basically, keep lines of communication open. Let us know what's going on, and we'll support you the whole way.
What's that thing Miyamoto says? He's like, God, man, I need to find the quote.
I think he said a delayed game will someday be good, but a rush game is forever bad. That's what he said.
Well, okay, here we go. Yeah, a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game requires. This is a joke one. It requires a lot of money to bribe good people for good reviews.
Yeah.
Well, here's the real one. A delayed game is eventually good. A bad game is bad forever.
It's looking at No Man's Sky, huh? They've put 3 years of updates into that and like so much free content, but it's still, whenever people look at it, they're like, should I buy this? I don't know. I heard it was bad.
Because of the reputation at launch,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that wraps it up for game delays. Let's move on to RPG character. Now, we got a big announcement to bring up here with the mystery character. And we've been saying that we were going to let people that take part in guessing the RPG character, the mystery character here, get to choose between games that we are going to play. And we're going to give you basically just a list of games that we're willing to play here. And we're going to announce those games this week, but you're not going to get to pick this week. We're going to give you all some more time to take part. But let me get these games up here. Stan, who got the answer correct last week? Do you have that up?
Yeah, for our mystery character, it was Lenneth from Valkyrie Profile, the first Valkyrie Profile game. And that was guessed correctly by Adresis Pieces, but also guessed by two other people, Dan K and CarQuest Camaro.
Good job, guys. All right, so basically how this is going to work is if you guess the character first, then you get 2 points. If you guess it later, you get 1 point, okay? So the 5 games that we have said that we will play for now, and this may change in the future after we pick a game off here. We're going to pick different games maybe, but of the 5 games that we said we would play, Final Fantasy 15 Royal Edition. So our first episode was on Final Fantasy 15, but that was basically the launch version. We were extremely negative, and they've put a lot of new content in there. They've remade like the last chapter. They've put a bunch of cutscenes in there and, you know, stuff like that. So just revisit the game with the new content and talk about it.
So for some weird reason, you want to hear me bitch and gripe even more about this game that we already have in the past few years, the option is technically available.
I'm getting my Tabata chops. Stan actually was not on the podcast at that point, so it'll be an opportunity.
I played the game at launch, but I have never touched any of the DLC content, the individual character episodes or any Royal Edition content. So I've only played the game how it existed when it came out.
It's crazy, man. I was looking at some of the games. I did replay it like 7 months after launch, and there was already a lot of stuff they added then. And, you know, now with, you know, all the stuff in the final chapter and all the additional cutscenes, I'm like, people are saying this is a lot better. So I'll give it a fair shake. So that's the first one that will be up for vote. And then also Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX is my favorite JRPG of all time. And yeah, everyone here said they were willing to play it. So that is another option. Next one is Super Mario RPG.
Another good one.
Classic. And then we have...
Short one. Highly recommend that one.
Highly recommend that one. That'll be a great discussion. Tales of Vesperia. Awesome game. And then Ni no Kuni. So pretty good range here. We got some classic Square games, and we got some, you know, some of the big franchises as well. So those are the games that you're going to be able to pick from if you take part in this mystery character. So while I have this up here, I do want to transition into some housekeeping here, and then we'll jump into talking about Persona 4 on Steam and Paper Mario. So just want to remind you all, we are media partners with RPGFan.com, and they are a awesome source, if you have not checked them out, for RPG news. They got game reviews, they got soundtrack reviews, they got podcasts, Random Encounter, Retro Encounter. They have our podcast on there. I believe they also have a music-based podcast, and they're constantly brainstorming new ideas as well. So make sure you go check them out. They also have a YouTube page. They're doing more video reviews, and it's some really good stuff. So we strongly recommend that you go check it out. This week or recently, they have a interview with, I don't know how to say the name, but we covered the game on this podcast. But Kuzuru Igarashi, the producer of the upcoming Brigadine tactical RPG for Switch. This was a game we talked about where it's a sequel to the game that came out on PlayStation in the late 90s. It had some really good gameplay, but the story was kind of bland. And, you know, they're going at it again with the sequel here, and they're improving on all those elements. They brought in the composer from the Disgaea series. They have somebody from the Final Fantasy series coming in, and it seems like it's going to be a pretty good game. So they got to interview him, and I actually got to submit a few questions. So that was a lot of fun for that as well. So you can go check that out on their webpage, rpgfan.com.
Yeah, that that game Brigandine is coming out on the 25th, so 3 days from now.
Big deal.
That's another one I was thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're kind of in a lull between if you don't want to play the Pokemon DLC, I mean, this might be a good thing to kind of tide you over until CrossCode comes out. So, just to keep you guys informed, if this is your first time listening, we do game discussions. So ones we've done in the past are Final Fantasy VII Remake, Crisis Core. We talked about Final Fantasy VII, the original on the PS1, Final Fantasy 15 and 13, Xenoblade Chronicles, Dragon Quest 11, Dragon Quest 5, Kingdom Hearts 3, Knights of the Old Republic, and Chrono Trigger. If we do too many more games, I'm not going to be able to cover them all in this portion of the podcast, but because I almost ran out of air there. But anyways, so those are the other game discussions that we've done. We plan to do more in the future. All right, so let's transition into our next topic. So last week we talked about the games that came out for the PS5 presentation. A lot of exciting stuff there, but there was lots of other announcements that were pretty exciting as well. But we didn't want to have a 5-hour podcast, so we felt like breaking it up with some of the ones that were not at the PS5 presentation. And one of the big ones that was released last week was Persona 4 Golden coming to Steam. And I kind of saw a little smidgen of it coming out earlier than that, and I kind of had to keep my lips tied here. But yeah, it's a Persona game on Steam. A lot of people are really excited. It had 30,000 concurrent players on launch, which broke the previous record for a single-player offline JRPG on the platform. That's more than Final Fantasy 15, which was at 29,300. So that's pretty big. That's concurrent players. That's pretty impressive. Yeah. So a lot of people are speculating, hey, Persona 4 Golden came to Steam. Are we going to get other Persona games on Steam? Is it possible Persona games will finally come to Switch, which is what people really want? Persona's been locked down on Sony's consoles for the eternity, right? But who knows at this point? So you guys have any thoughts about Persona 4 Golden coming to Steam? Anything you want to bring up? I checked out some of the review scores for it, and basically people are pretty happy with it. It seems like you don't need to have a very advanced PC to play it. It is a Vita game. It's a port of the Vita game. The only thing I've seen of complaint is that the game is actually just kind of blown up because it is a Vita game on your computer screen. You can tell it is a portable game being blown up. So it kind of looks really smooth on the edges and stuff, but Persona 4 is not hyper realistic. So I don't think that it's really that big of an issue personally, but is this something that interests you all? Persona 4 Golden?
I've already played through it on Vita, so not necessarily, but I'm really glad it finally left that handheld and made it to at least somewhere else. I mean, Atlas has so much to gain to get their previous titles on PC and other consoles, especially the Switch. Like, I want to see Radiant Historia make its way to PC and consoles. Like, more people deserve to play that game, and it's sad that it's only on the DS and 3DS.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I'm just speaking of Atlas in general. They could really bring those games over to PC, and so many more people would play it. Maybe not on the Japanese side. That's probably why they're hesitant to release games on PC to begin with. But the West just eats it up on PC. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think they should just put Persona 1 through 5 on PC. They should put the old Shin Megami Tensei games. They need to HD remaster 3 and put that on consoles and PC. I mean, there's a lot of back catalog they could hire people to do, and people will eat each and every title up easily.
It's kind of a weird thing though, because this version of the game came out on the Vita, and then the original version came out on the PlayStation 2. So it's a little strange that it's coming out on PC, but we don't have a PlayStation 4 version. I thought that was a little odd.
That is odd.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if they are testing the waters for the PC market to see like how, because I'm sure if they release the Persona 5 on PC, well, that's like a new, still somewhat recent game,
Right.
And so you might have like a lot of recent people who purchased it like purchase it again on PC just because they love the game so much,
Sure.
But this is like an older game that's also like was on the Vita, right? And so they're trying to test like, well, how much interest is there in like the old Persona properties? And that was the most recent one they could go back to that wasn't Persona 5, so they're like, let's go with this one since it's the most difficult to access for most people.
That's a good point, because when you brought up that they're just trying to test the PC market, my immediate gut reaction was to say, well, why don't they just release it on the PS4 also? But I guess if they did that, Persona 5's already on the PS4. If they're trying to see how many sales they would get from just the PC audience, that might kind of not give them a good idea, right? If they're going to re-release Persona 5 on PC also. So that's a good point. It's just a very weird situation though, because we've talked about it on the podcast. It seems like there's some kind of deal between Atlas and Sony to keep Persona on Sony consoles until now.
But it does seem that way.
Yeah, but there's very little information we can find about it, and they don't really talk about it. So it kind of seems like perhaps Sony gave the green light, like, okay, like that's fine, that's okay. We're not going to get mad if you put it on PC, or maybe that agreement's been revised, or whatever the case. It seems that way anyways, but I have to wonder that the end game goal here has to be the Switch, because if people are saying, well, the only negative effect of this is the Vita, it's just a port of the Vita version, and you can tell it's a blown up image on my PC screen, I would like to play Persona 4 Golden on my Switch in handheld mode. And I think that would be the best way to play it, to be honest. So
yeah,
I got to think these games are coming to Switch eventually. But I don't know. It's exciting, though. It's very exciting that it's on PC for sure. So,
yeah, seems like the perfect solution to the, like you said, the image being blown up. If that's an issue for you, if it was on Switch, then that would be
it'd be perfect.
A step in the right direction for that.
Yeah.
It's got a similar resolution to the Vita, the Switch. So,
well, I mean, it's better, but
actually better on it.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's small, so it'll look much sharper and everything like that. But the other announcement that came this past week that we wanted to touch on was there was another trailer, a much more very in-depth trailer than the last one we got for Paper Mario. And this has been something Eric has been saying he's really excited about. So what'd you think about this trailer while I get it up, Eric?
Pretty awesome. It doesn't completely answer all my questions, but it gives me a really good idea of what they're trying to do. It looks like they're trying to bring in ideas that were good in Color Splash and try to bring some elements of old and new at the same time. It's like they're not trying to give people 1,000-Year Door. They're still trying to give people something new, but I think looks like they're trying to do a meet in the middle type thing where they want the battles and strategy to matter in this game. And it looks very apparent with the new battle system they have. So basically, the battle system is not simply like the turn-based games where you pick an attack and you do your thing. And thank God it's not the cards either, or the stickers or something. But it's a new system called the ring system. And how it works is you have like a circular map. Mario's in the middle. And you can adjust the rings to line up the enemies in a certain fashion. So every battle is kind of like a puzzle in a way. So to figure out how to properly line them to get the most out of each attack you do, which I think is really cool and adds a lot of strategy to it. And for boss fights in particular, which is, if you watch the trailer, some pretty funny boss fights. You literally fight a giant tape dispenser.
Yeah, and a bunch of colored pencils. That's another
Yeah.
one.
Colored pencils, which is some pretty fantastic stuff. But basically, the ring system changes in that you have to adjust it to guide Mario through a trail around the ring to meet the boss in the middle. And then you can do your big devastating attacks to him once you do reach in the middle. So that's going to be a very interesting strategic like system, and I'm looking very forward to trying it. The one thing they didn't show though is they don't really show you what rewards you get for completing a battle, because a problem with Sticker Star and Color Splash was there wasn't really a progressive system per se. Sticker Star, you were actually encouraged to run away from fights because you didn't want to waste your stickers on enemies who didn't give you EXP or anything of the sort. There's no EXP in the game. It's just you can find better stickers. You obviously don't want to waste those better stickers on beating enemies. So a lot of people didn't like the combat system for it. And Color Splash kind of fixed that by giving you more paint to put on your cards. But a lot of times it still wasn't worth doing, especially since paint was just everywhere for you to accumulate. So in this system, I really hope they bring a stronger form of progression back. I see that he has like HP on the top that's like a lot more than what you usually start out with. So maybe there is some return to form on that, but we still gotta see. In terms of the world itself, it looks like they're Color Splash did a thing which I still thought was fine. They kind of had like a grid world map where you choose the next area to go to. And granted, each area was beautifully detailed and fun to explore, but it wasn't seamless at all. So far, it looks like this game is more seamless. You travel like from like area to area, one big world, similar to the older games. Now, they could pull a fast one and it could be a world map again, but all the stuff they're showing is like these like bigger areas to explore. And it looks fantastic also in that regard. And it looks like it's going to be a heavier story game too, comparatively to the what we got in Sticker Star and Color Splash. So everything is just looking fantastic so far. And of course, the game looks absolutely beautiful. They're bringing a lot of Color Splash aesthetics to this, and Color Splash is one of the most gorgeous games on the Wii U. So bringing that to this and making it look even better, it's astonishing the stuff I've seen in just the trailers alone.
Yeah, aesthetically, I really like the way it looks in terms of like you brought up the color and just the quality of the graphics. It looks very, very polished. Of course it is. It's a Mario game, right? But it's worth bringing up here that it looks really, really good. And the other thing that I like what I'm seeing here is that when you bring up the battles, it does seem more RPG based, right? Where I know some people felt that some of the other games were not quite, they're starting to get away from the RPG stuff, where I'm not saying this looks like a full blown JRPG, but it does look like they're bringing back some of that turn based combat, or at least it's still there anyways. And they haven't gone off in a completely new direction. So I do like the fact that it's getting back more to what people liked about it. So we shall see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's another day one for me, so I will definitely talk about it in detail late July.
Cool. Yeah, when's the release date? July 25th?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Let's see here. I think it's on here somewhere.
They always release on a Friday.
On a Friday?
So the 24th?
The 24th?
The 17th.
The 17th, even better. All right.
Even
17th. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. So we can look forward to that. All right. So our next topic here, we have, like I said before at the top of the podcast, Lane had asked us to name our favorite RPG of every console. And that is quite the endeavor. And we were trying to fit it into our podcast episodes. and it just kept not fitting. And then we realized we're an RPG podcast. Well, why don't we just do this a little bit at a time? Because it would probably be a pretty good discussion. You all said that you like hearing us talking about games that we've already played. So this will be a good opportunity to do that. So this week we're going to talk about the Nintendo or the NES, and we're just going to talk about our favorite RPG on the NES.
And just a note, this is the consoles right now. Maybe we'll do handheld another time.
Well, we're just going to do just the NES today. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
we were initially talking about doing all the Nintendo consoles, and we're like, oh, we'll break it up that way. But then we were kind of doing the math, and we're like, well, even if we're really brief with what we said, it would still take over an hour just to do the Nintendo. And we're like, okay, let's just chop this up into little discussions that are more enjoyable. Because I don't think anybody would really like us to just be like Final Fantasy 2, and then that's it, you know. So they want us to actually talk about it. But Eric, what is your favorite NES RPG? I think I already know what it is, but go ahead.
Oh, why don't you guess? Why don't you
Dragon
guess?
Quest 3?
God damn it, you're good. Yeah, yeah, that is definitely my favorite one without a doubt. It is one of the most fun RPGs I've ever played, and it still holds up incredibly well today. It's the first one where you got to choose the classes that you wanted to come with you. You could do a bunch of cool party setups and ways to make the game more interesting. This was the point of the Dragon Quest series where they were a lot more clear with you on the direction where you needed to go in the game. So for someone that was younger like me, it still took forever when I was a kid to beat it, but it was still a fantastic experience. One I didn't need a strategy guide for, even though it took forever to beat the first time. And I also played it on the Game Boy Color, and
That
it has so much going on for an RPG on the NES. It's really taking advantage of what you could do on the hardware.
That's actually the first way I played Dragon Quest 3 was on the Game Boy Color. And I used to get we used to have this thing in my family where I'd get to rent a video game every weekend from Blockbuster, and I rented Dragon Quest 3 for the Game Boy Color, and I played that all weekend, and then it came to Monday and it was time to, give it to my mom and she's going to take it back. And that was the first game I asked my mom, "Can we re-rent it again?" And she was like, "Yeah, you can rent it next Friday." And I was like, "Well, no, the save file's on this cartridge. So like,
Yeah.
that's not going to, I don't want to like replay everything. I want to play with these characters." Right. So she was like, "Okay, fine." And I got to, keep it again for another couple of days. And I don't know what it is about that game, but cause the story's just kind of like, it's for an NES game, it's pretty good. Right. But it's not going to make you cry or anything like that, but it's pretty good for an NES game. But I think it's just the gameplay is really, really tight. It's really well balanced. It's really well paced. There's new towns that are constantly coming up. There's new equipment that's constantly available, and it just keeps your interest. And Dragon Quest 3 is, I think, my favorite NES game as well. Although I do want to take 1 second and say that I found a recent game on the NES that only came out in Japan, and I've been playing it on an emulator every now and again. I haven't beaten it yet, so I can't really say it's my favorite NES game, but it's called, I'm going to pull it up on the screen here so you guys can check it out, but it's called Chronicles of Radia War. And this game is like a really impressive NES game. And that's just something that really gets me with NES games in general, is just the simplistic nature of the hardware. You can really tell when a game is really pushing what's possible with it. And this thing had like a whole story, like animated cutscene to open the game, and it's like very exciting and just like very like action packed, and like it had a lot of presentation that I thought was really powerful for an NES game. And it's also like an action, kind of like a Zelda type game, but you have a whole party that also takes part in that action. So it's pretty complicated for like from a programming standpoint. And I mean, it's just, I feel like this should have been an SNES game. It's very impressive. It came out in 1991. I'm gonna see if I can get some of the battle system up here on the screen.
Yeah, that's around the era where they were taking the most advantage of the hardware was
Yeah, I mean it's
91 to 93. Like if you look at like Wario's Woods or so, I think it was called that. That was on the NES. Like that is pretty much like straight up a borderline Super Nintendo game.
yeah, it's just crazy because I've like this specific game I've never even heard of before until I saw it showing up on RPG lists, and then I started emulating it, and I was just like, wow, this is impressive. Like this would have been a classic if it came out in the States. So I just wanted to bring that up in case somebody's looking for something to play. But Stan, what is your favorite NES RPG?
So as I was looking through my favorite NES games, I thought I had one, which was an old game called Star Tropics.
Oh, okay.
But then I looked it up, and it was actually it's actually not classified as an RPG. That says it's an action adventure game. And then I was like, really? And I looked back on it, and it's like, yeah, it's more of the classic 2D Zelda, like top-down perspective kind of game.
Hmm.
And so I remembered it being more RPG like, but I guess that it's not.
Well,
So I can't claim that one. But
When I was a kid, like practically, like if the character had a sword and like you ran around, it was an
Yeah.
RPG.
yeah, right.
So
Yeah.
I'll give a special shout out to the Fire Emblem games on NES. Now you do have to play a translated ROM of them because they never came to America. But Shadow Dragon and Gaiden are both really good games. Now they've remade them already. You can play Shadow Dragon on the DS, and you can play Gaiden. They made a 3DS remake of it. It was like Shadows of Valentia or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can play on those, but I mean, they're still really good as NES titles. If you want to like pull up a emulator and find a translated ROM for them, they're still a really good time too.
yeah, Stan, was there a game you eventually ended up picking?
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and like I've never played those Fire Emblem games that Eric just mentioned, and I have never played any of the Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior games, as they were called here when they came out. I did play a little bit of Dragon Warrior 1, the first Dragon Quest game, but I don't remember enough of it to really consider it a favorite. So then it came down to Final Fantasy 1 and Zelda 2, which I consider Zelda 2 to be an RPG. It's got like magic points and HP in the game, It's
Got to grind like crazy to level up.
Yeah, it's got character levels for Link and everything, yeah, so. But I decided to go with Final Fantasy 1, the original
Classic.
game. Yeah. Although that's not like a huge, like a best favorite of mine. I guess my NES RPG library is pretty small.
Well, is there anything about Final Fantasy One that you think is well done for the NES, or that you thought was good?
I mean, I like the difficulty of it, the original version, right? But then I like the PSP version is much easier, I think, overall.
Right.
But then I kind of like the quality of life improvements in that version. So it's kind of like if I had to choose, I'd probably play the PSP version because difficulty is not such a huge thing. One thing I really don't like about it is the targeting system when you attack an enemy that is in the NES version. When you attack an enemy that was just defeated, like by the previous turn, you get ineffective when you attack.
It goes swipes.
Yeah, your character attacks the air, and you just get ineffective rather than them targeting like the next enemy, the next available enemy. And in the old game, you didn't have MP, but you had like magic charges, they were called, for your characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were like going to cast a lightning spell on an enemy, but then the warrior also attacked the enemy and like got a critical hit or something, so the enemy happened to die. the mage would still attempt to cast lightning, and it would be ineffective. It would miss, but it would still cost you a magic charge for that spell. So that was like really annoying.
Yeah,
because it was difficult to replenish those in that game.
that I really do like Final Fantasy 1 just from the art aesthetic standpoint. Just like I think it looks like a really nice looking, NES RPG.
Mm-hmm.
But I gotta be honest with you, it is that ghost swipe mechanic that makes me not want to play that version and play the other ones, because that is so defeating, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, whoever thought that was a good idea, I don't know. Maybe it was Sakaguchi himself. I don't know, but that was a bad idea. And this was just the wild, wild west of them not really having a set framework for what to do, right? And I am like, what they intended to do with that was they thought it was a good idea to have players try to like know the enemy, right? Like you're experienced with the enemy, so it has about 50 HP, so you can try to like plan ahead, so your characters will, okay, by then the third person will kill it, so I need to put, it's more strategy, but they didn't realize, they had never done it before. There wasn't a set framework. That's just not a good idea for a whole game,
Yeah.
Especially when like you only get like 3 or 4 moves for certain abilities and stuff. That's just so detrimental. So
I will say I actually kind of prefer the NES version. Like if you want to challenge the NES version or the PlayStation 1 version to an extent, I believe the PlayStation 1 version fixed the ineffective
it did.
Thing, but the NES version, there is like a certain level of strategy to it that you can kind of appreciate and try to just plan out your attacks instead of just hitting attack.
Yeah.
Everyone with that. And the resource management is done really well also. The problem I have with the more modern Final Fantasy ones is when they completely removed all that stuff, the game became very easy.
Right.
Like, I wish there was like a kind of balance, or they made the game a little harder to compensate for giving you the modern
take.
Yeah, the modern take on it, or at least offer a hard mode or something. But they're still good fun games, and if you prefer one the other, that's cool. But if you want like the most challenge out of it, then definitely the NES version.
Yeah, it's definitely the hardest. And I do remember the game, if you bought it new, along with the instruction manual, it also came with like a big kind of poster that you could unfurl or kind of unfold out of the box, right? And on one side it had the world map of the game, which was very helpful. But on the other side it had essentially the bestiary, like all the monsters and all their total HP and like their attacks and stuff. So they wanted you to use that and be like, okay, which enemy have I encountered, right? It's like, oh, it's this wolf enemy, and there's like 6 of them or whatever, and they have this much HP each. And like you're saying, like plan out like which attacks and how much damage does that do about, and how can I most effectively like get through this encounter. But that's very tedious to do today.
Yeah. And that sounds outlandish, and it is, but that was actually somewhat reserved compared to what some games did back then, where they would have, you literally have like a book that comes with the game. And because there was a finite amount of space you could use and they didn't want to use it for too much text, they wanted the game to be bigger. So a lot of games would have, and this was more PC games, but they'd have a book and it would say like, turn to page 37, and you'd turn to page 37 and it would have like the plot for like whatever part of the game you're in. And you would just read page 37 and you'd be like, oh, this is what's happening. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Then you continue to be like, okay, page 42. All right.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, what? So this, it's just crazy how things have changed. And you go back and play it and you're just like, why would people do this? Well, they didn't know any better. They were trying new stuff out,
Yeah.
So.
It's those kind of trial and errors, that led us to where we are today,
Right.
So you can appreciate it in that aspect.
Right. Inventory management, though, it's still on its way. It's still on its way.
30 years is still working on it, right?
We're still working it out a little bit,
Yeah.
But yeah, so pretty good discussion there. Next time we'll go ahead and do the Super Nintendo, and that should be a pretty fun discussion. But we do have another Discord question from Redfield, who says, "What is your favorite Final Fantasy game that is not technically a Final Fantasy game?" And he gives examples here. He says, Lost Odyssey, The Last Story, Blue Dragon, Bravely Default. So basically, we think he means a Sakaguchi game that's not Final Fantasy. Now, I don't know if it means it can be a Square game or not, but what do you guys think about this question?
Well, he put Bravely Default in there, right?
Oh, that's true.
So
I didn't even think about that. Bravely Default is not a Sakaguchi game.
It is
Bravely Default I shall choose.
But it is a Square game, right? So
That's a very good point. So now totally, I think it was just because I read the first 3 and I was like, okay, Sakaguchi. Okay, I get it.
I feel like the question means just
and style
kind of that
Final Fantasy.
old school Final Fantasy vibe, but it's not called a Final Fantasy game, right?
Okay. So what do you?
Yeah.
Bravely Default was the most Final Fantasy game that come out in an era where we felt like we couldn't get Final Fantasy anywhere anymore. It's so reminiscent of Final Fantasy V that it might as well be called Final Fantasy V 2 to some extent, because it brings its exact job system back, and battle system is turn-based, but it has the Bravely Default system with it. But the story is just it has a weird twist in the later chapters, but I think it's a really rock solid game with characters I enjoyed playing with along the way. And I don't know, that I would just say out of all of them, Bravely Default I think hits closest to being a Final Fantasy game without saying Final Fantasy in the title.
Yeah, I can agree with that. From those listed, I would have to say Bravely Default. If I wanted to expand that and just say a game that is Final Fantasy-ish, but is not called Final Fantasy, I would absolutely have to pick Chrono Trigger because
yeah, that was mine too.
because I was going to say that game was literally supposed to be a Final Fantasy, and it's just a phenomenal game, anyways, right? But I think that game just encapsulates everything that's good about a Final Fantasy and more so. And a lot of times when I approach people that or encounter people that have not played a Final Fantasy before, and they say, which one should I play first? I'll throw them off guard and I'll just say, go ahead and play Chrono Trigger. And they're like, well, that's not a Final Fantasy. And I'm like, well, it's made by the same people and it's only like 20, 25 hours. So if you like Chrono Trigger, come back to me and I'll tell you where to go from there, because I just think that like, it's just the perfect RPG, and it very much feels Final Fantasy-ish. And honestly, if you like that, you might as well go into Dragon Quest too. So I think that Chrono Trigger is an excellent non-Final Fantasy RPG.
You see, Chrono Trigger is my favorite JRPG. The thing is, though, while you look at it more as a Final Fantasy game, I lean more on the Dragon Quest side.
Yeah, because he doesn't talk.
There isn't a wrong answer to that, but to me, as a bigger Dragon Quest fan, I look at more of the Dragon Quest elements of it than Final Fantasy.
I guess since Chrono doesn't, like, we don't see Chrono's entire life, and to me, like, Dragon Quest games kind of have that like coming of age story. It just felt more like a Final Fantasy to me. But I do see what you're saying though, because there is the fact that Chrono doesn't even talk, which is very much not a Final Fantasy thing, especially in the Super Nintendo. So
it's interesting. Yeah, I was gonna say it's interesting because it has like Final Fantasy, like for the time it was made, it has like very clear Final Fantasy influences, and then also very clear Dragon Quest influences too, right? Like on the FF side, you have the ATB combat system, right? For the most part, it's a ATB turn-based system. It's just that's what it is. But then on the Dragon Quest side, you have the art style, right? is Dragon Quest, and then like the silent protagonist, like you mentioned also. So, but then you have things that are like neither of them. Like there's no random encounters, right? They are scripted encounters, and you don't transition to another battle screen when you run into the enemy.
which is
Like
new.
that's something that, even though they introduced that in Chrono Trigger, like for those developers that were working on it, like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy didn't go to a not like a non-random encounter system until way later. Like way after that. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. Yeah, it has influences from both, but then there's some parts of it like the no random encounters, and like of course the whole time travel thing, like that doesn't feel very Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest until much later, right? Until that later on, like those franchises, explore that more.
Yeah.
I would see it. It really is a love child between Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, and it still, even with those elements, still somehow creates its own identity
Mhm.
out of it, which is just absolutely insane and just a masterwork from two brilliant developers.
Yeah. If I have to say, if we want to suggest some other RPGs that are Final Fantasy ish, okay, but they kind of take a little a different path. You could say Xenogears, right? Because that incorporated a lot of elements that were supposed to be in Final Fantasy VII, and while it's a different tone, I do think that it fits nicely kind of in that realm to a degree.
Mhm.
And then I would also say reach out and try some Shadow Hearts on the PlayStation 2, because that was made by former Square Soft employees, and you can definitely tell like from the pacing and just the town design and everything. Like their experience and influences are Final Fantasy, so it just feels like a Final Fantasy game. It is rated M, so it's much more bloodier and just much more mature, but it feels very close to a Final Fantasy game. So I would say recommend that. And then he hasn't been on the podcast in a while, but he's been on the podcast a few times, mostly talking about Final Fantasy VII. And he was messaging me the other day, and he was talking about this game that was only released in Japan. It was called, I'm going to butcher this, Rudro no, I'm sorry?
I know it's short for it's Rudra.
Rudra. Okay, see, I already goofed it up. Rudro no Hio. I don't know how to say that. But anyways, so it's this. Let me see if I can just look it up on YouTube here. I'm going to copy and paste it. But he's
What console was it on?
Super Nintendo, and
Okay.
so this game is a Square game, I believe. And yeah, it looks very much like Final Fantasy VI. It's a late gen game, and it's honestly it looks really good. So let me get this up on the screen just so some people can see what I'm talking about here. So I mean, it's got the blue boxes, it's got that very Final Fantasy VI-esque style, and yeah, it looks really good. I haven't checked it out, but Heon's recommended many of good JRPGs to me, and he says this one is well deserving of a Final Fantasy name, even though it's not. So
I think I'm actually going to try this out soon because I forgot about this and I'm kind of looking for a distraction game. So yeah, I think I'll try this one out.
yeah, I've been tempted ever since he brought it up, but I've had something else I've been playing. So, anyways, is there any other Final Fantasy-esque styled games that you guys want to bring up before we put a close to this podcast?
I'll give a shout out to, while these aren't games that Sakaguchi worked on, but when I play them, I kind of feel like I'm playing like an old school Final Fantasy game. Is the two Lunar games, like Lunar Silver Star Story and Eternal Blue for PS1. Now they don't kind of have the story tone. They're like a little more lighthearted in tone, but they do have that kind of 90s RPG feel to them, like big time.
Right.
So yeah, those are two that I kind of want to go back to recently. I've been thinking about them. So, but those are. I feel like I'm playing like a a 90s JRPG, which was mostly Final Fantasy for me back then. So it reminds me of those games.
Cool. Very cool. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Eric, you got any other ones hanging out there that you want to bring up?
Oh, there. Funny thing is, there's so many out there that are Final Fantasy inspired, but they kind of escape my mind right now.
Yeah, I'm sure once we end, we'll have some more. But yeah, that should be enough to get you guys started. So really appreciate you all checking us out today. And we're kind of going back to just uploading the podcast on the video version anyways. We used to just stream it every week. YouTube's having issues, and it's just taking sometimes a day and a half for it to process. So we're just going to upload it for now. But once YouTube gets that fixed, we'll definitely try the streaming thing again. But we appreciate you all sticking in there with us, and we will check you all out next week. Thank you guys.
Take care.
See you next time.